So we're going to recap the webinar we just completed on the top metrics of longevity, where we had our special guest, Leonard Pastrana, who graciously shared his expertise. We had a lot of great questions come through. We couldn't get to all of them, and we're going to dive into as many as we can here today.
Sounds like fun. Let's do it.
All right, Leonard. So first off, I'll just pick a few here. What is the latest on the use of epigenetic clocks as biomarkers in your experience?
Well, epigenetic clocks have been a lot of fun, and there's constant updates that are coming out. I'm especially looking forward to some updates that are coming out at the end of the year. Not just how they're working, but some of the research they're doing in conjunction with a lot of the medical practitioners in the longevity space. Just recently, I saw one by True Diagnostics that was great, that they showed an accelerated aging between the ages of 40 and 60, kind of changing, not necessarily changing the way that we think about aging, but knowing that basically showing that we have some type of programmed acceleration of aging around that age between 40 and 60. And so this makes a lot of sense for clinically what physicians are seeing out there, because this is typically the age that we see people coming in and complaining about brain fog, body composition changes. And so I find the epigenetic age clocks very interesting. I think that there's a long way to go with them. But this is a personal thing too. I look at those as more like fun of what's my biological age, what's happening. And a lot of people may disagree with me, but I don't, I'm using other metrics to make clinical decisions typically than some of these epigenetic clocks.
Yeah, I think one that's interesting out there, Leonard, is the Dunedin pace, I believe.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people out there running these repeat tests, and the results seem to be relatively uniform from test to test, and they're starting to make the lifestyle changes and see the aging clocks improve as they retest. So with any biomarker, there's variance and standard deviation and how stressed out were you when you got to the lab on that particular day versus the last test. So like that's just
Yeah.
ubiquitous across even taking 2 blood pressure readings from an FDA approved blood pressure cuff, like they all bounce around. But at least
Yeah.
from what I'm seeing with some of the open source data is at least some level of consistency and predictability from test to test. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's by biomarker, right? So I've sat down with a lot of the people behind these companies, and they'll be honest with you when they say, what their ratios are on how accurate each one is, right? So some of these have a number of different biomarkers, and they'll tell you that even some things like VO2 max testing and things like that, they'll tell you, hey, we have some validation here, but it's probably the lower end of the validation when it comes to all the biomarkers, where they'll tell you some metrics that they have that they're really sure about. But that duodenum pace is one that I love. That the rate of how fast you're aging is such a great marker. It's the first one that I'm looking at whenever I'm taking a test like that.
Yeah, and if you can start to tackle that between the ages of 40 to 60, like you mentioned, where the
Mm.
genetic programming kicks in to start accelerating our rate of aging, and that's when we jump in and start doing all of the things to start, I guess, pushing back on that biological process a little bit. I think the data and the jury is still out, but I want to play the game where I'm doing everything I can in that 40 to 60-year-old window to try to reverse that process. There's another recent study in March 2025 that came out that looks at insulin resistance in your 40s. They identified this critical window. It may have even been you that shared the study with me, but right around age 44, if
Mm.
you're starting to develop insulin resistance, that is actually what starts the process of the vascular damage that can lead to Alzheimer's when we're 64. So that just
Mm.
kind of corroborates what you just mentioned, which is there's this window of opportunity in that 40 to 60-year-old range to really start hitting all these interventions and start measuring a lot of the biomarkers that you talked about on the webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. Insulin resistance is the core of what we teach early on, because it makes everything make so much more sense. I believe that that's where everything's kind of starting, and it's big pharma, it's the pharmaceuticals, it's the compounds, it's the supplements, it's how we prescribe exercise is all impacting insulin resistance. And that's insulin dependent pathways and insulin independent pathways. And we talk a lot about that in a lot of our education.
Do you think the ApoB, ApoA1 ratio is more important than just ApoB?
I think that the ratio is interesting to look at, but I don't think it's more important than the ApoB. The reason that someone would look at the ratio is that the ApoB is looking at atherogenic particles, while the ApoA is looking at non-atherogenic particles. But when we're looking at the literature and we're looking at risk, it was more validated towards looking at ApoB because these are the atherogenic particles that we're worried about, rather than looking at the ratio. But it's fun. It's good to look at. It does tells us a little bit something, but I'm basing decisions based on ApoB.
Great. This is something, Len, I know you probably have
Mm,
done more research on than anybody, but how much
mm,
water is necessary to stop protein
mm.
degradation?
Yeah, so we don't have any direct, studies that are telling us the amount of water to stop protein degradation. So we know that somewhere between 2 to 3 liters of water per day is what we're looking to do, depending on body weight. But when it comes to protein degradation, that's more of looking at. We understand that when we have cell shrinkage, or we have a decrease in intracellular water, that this signals a cell to be more catabolic or stimulate protein degradation. And so what we're trying to do is always improve intracellular water, make sure that we have the right cell volume, because this is going to have an opposite effect and protect against protein degradation. So we don't have a specific amount of water. And that's why we use amino acid osmolytes and things like creatine that improve intracellular water. But somewhere between 2 and 3 liters of water a day should be sufficient.
Awesome. Body fat question. So, is there
Mm.
a rough range on what percentage of total body fat is typically needed to get the visceral adipose tissue sub 1 pound? Is there a formula there, or is it highly bio-individual?
Yeah, it's very individual, and this is why I think DEXA scans are so important. Because I could tell you from running a lot of these that you can typically tell if someone is overweight or has a lot of fat tissue, that they typically have high visceral adipose tissue, but that's not always the case. Sometimes you'll have someone come in that is extremely overweight and their visceral adipose tissue is not what you expect it to be. Same thing on the other end, someone comes in and they're thinner and they have high visceral adiposity, and so that's because with caloric excess, subcutaneous tissue goes through these pathological changes that turn into, visceral adiposity. And so that's different in everybody. And so it's congruent sometimes, but sometimes it isn't. And so you really can't go on body fat percentage, or looking at what body fat percentage do I have to get for my visceral adipose tissue to be lower. And this is why we measure it, because it's different in everybody.
This is probably my favorite question of the whole lot here. What biomarker do you wish you could measure, but the sensor does not exist yet?
That's a really cool question. If I had time to think about it, I'm probably going to think about that one all
Okay,
day, just
let's
because
come back to that one.
I'm gonna come up with it. No, but I have one for now, because I don't think I'll be able to come up with one on the
I got
spot.
one.
Yeah, the one for me would be like a continuous fasting insulin. The same way that we can measure glucose with a continuous glucose monitor, I would love to be able to continuously monitor fasting insulin, because the glucose is telling us what's happening when we eat food, but I really want to know how hard my pancreas is working, and how well, how much insulin do I need to get back to homeostasis. So understanding the impact on what we're doing when it comes to like sleep and stress, and exercise on fasting insulin levels, I think would be really interesting to see it on a continuous manner.
Yeah, that would have been my response as well, as some type of continuous insulin monitor, or even at home insulin as a finger stick would be a win. We don't have
Yeah,
that yet either.
I think somebody's working on it, but
Yeah.
not
All right.
close.
Leonard, during the webinar, you mentioned some of the markers you can use to predict weight gain after GLP-1. On the webinar, you mentioned some of the tests that can help us predict weight gain after
Mm.
GLP-1. Does that testing need to be done prior, during, or after starting treatment?
Yeah. So we talked a lot about the two main factors that contribute to either plateaus or weight regain, and it's typically slowing down of metabolism, so lower energy expenditure, and the other one is poor fat oxidation. And so I think it's important to the question to have these baseline parameters, right? So you're going to want to know where someone's metabolism was at initially, because if you think about and that's going to change as you lose weight and as your muscle mass status changes. And so that's why it's important to do a resting metabolic test with metabolic breath analysis, because it's going to take all of those factors into play. So I think it's important to have it initially so that we can see, did metabolism go in the wrong direction when you get to goal weight? Because if metabolism went into the wrong direction, and I mean, this is very kind of like nuanced, but I'm not measuring how many kilocalories of their actual RMR is, or their energy expenditure, because it depends on how much they weigh, and then we can have very big significant changes in weight. I'm looking at what their calculated RMR is supposed to be, right? So calculated with age, weight, height. What is that? And then is your actual RMR, energy expenditure, lower or higher than that? Because if it's lower, then we know that we're in a situation that when you maybe start to eat the same amount of calories but as you were before, that you're going to gain weight so much faster.
Makes sense.
And this is just the body's natural response to caloric restriction. And so this is something that we want to look at, because then we'll decide differently how we want to maybe pivot off GLP-1s. Maybe you want to reverse titrate. You want to go down in dose, and then and see, can we maintain weight at these lower dosages? And or what are the other things that we can do? Like if you lost muscle mass, can we add things like ISO water or growth hormone peptides, resistance training, protein intake? What can we do to improve muscle mass so that we can improve that metabolism?
Is that the biggest lever then,
Mm,
Leonard, is
mm,
lean mass as a function of your predicted versus actual
mm.
calorie burn? And then I guess if there's lean mass that comes off during the weight loss process, then that could further exacerbate the difference between those two
Yep.
numbers. And that's why you'd really want to focus on things that are going to rebuild lean mass.
Yes, absolutely. There's two big things that are contributing to it. It's one, it's that caloric restriction where the body is trying to do you a favor. It thinks you're starving on an island. So it's saying, okay, no problem. I'm going to decrease the amount of energy that you need to sustain life, to help you out. It's trying to do the right thing. But the other one is the decrease in muscle mass that is going to be the number one lever, like you mentioned, that you can pull on. So yes, improving muscle mass is the number one thing that we can do to improve energy expenditure.
Awesome. So another one where I think you have some great expertise, Leonard. Can you speak to tirzepatide versus semaglutide and the difference in the outcomes versus the two? The specific question was, do they have the same metabolic lab results for all patients, or are you seeing differences between the two?
Um, if I'm going to say from what I've been seeing, anecdotally, the differences are very minimal. So I would look at the literature with, much bigger population sizes, and it's very, very similar. I mean, you can get very nitpicky about it when it comes to metabolic things. If we looked at tirzepatide and semaglutide, I saw slightly better results when it comes to triglycerides. When it comes to VLDLs, that was the last study I saw. Maybe there's something new that's come out, but very, very minimal. For me, it's all about price. Some people tolerate semaglutide versus tirzepatide better, but you really can't go wrong with one or the other. We're just getting a little nitpicky. I tend to have seen better results myself with tirzepatide in the patients and collaboration that we've seen before, but it's not that significant.
Copy. Leonard, any more affordable alternatives to DEXA that
Hmm.
you've seen that are giving some really good
Hmm.
clean data out there?
So there's things like InBody, and there's also things like Sika. Sika is another InBody scanner that are good. And I look at these more as looking for trends, right? They're going to tell us muscle mass. They're going to tell us they're going to give us a visceral adipose score as compared to a DEXA scan. It's going to actually tell us the actual weight. And so the way that I look at these, and we have an InBody in our place as well too, we're looking at these as more trending. Are we trending in the right direction? And so I'm not, I'm very careful of telling like patients, especially they get really upset. They come in from one day to the next and they see a big difference. And we have to have the conversation about water weight. If they're female, talking about the differences during their cycle where you would retain more water. So there's a lot of things that can make that number be a little bit different. So we're looking at trends over time, not day-to-day stuff, because it'll be off by a pound, or a score. Visceral fat might be 7, and you get right back on the machine and it's 8. So not trying to get hung up on anything in the short term, but looking at as you trend, you can get really good data there.
Awesome. Thanks, Lynn. So this one gets into more of the metabolic specific testing, and there's a couple questions here I'll lump together. So the questions are, can you talk a little bit about emphasizing hemoglobin A1C versus fasting insulin? And then are you also looking at the HOMA-IR marker as well?
Sure. So, yeah, no, I would never say to just look at fasting insulin over hemoglobin A1C, right? So hemoglobin A1C is foundational. It's the first line of what we want to look, because we want to make sure and take a look at somebody as pre-diabetic or, of course, diabetic. Now, if somebody has a lower hemoglobin A1C or they're a little bit healthier, it's not going to be as sensitive, because remember, everybody has different sized red blood cells. And so it's a measure of those red blood cells over a 3-month time. So we're getting kind of an average of what glucose looks like with a hemoglobin A1C. So definitely taking a look at that, but I'm always taking a look at that with a grain of salt, and I'm looking at fasting insulin. Now, the question about HOMA-IR, HOMA-IR is looking at fasting insulin, but it's also incorporating glucose to the equation, right? And so this is what's used in a lot of studies to have a better understanding of insulin resistance. I'm still looking at fasting insulin just because it's very easy. And then also with glucose, it could change. It depends. Certain people have a different. You can see a big change in their glucose reading depending on what time in the morning that they're taking their glucose reading. Now, what people would say is, yes, I understand that, but with HOMA-IR, it's also taking that into account that insulin would be changing as well. And so they're two really great markers. They're typically on the same panel. HOMA-IR is really good to look at, but fasting insulin is very easy. I know exactly where I kind of want it to be, and it tells me a lot. But all these markers, HOMA-IR and insulin, are going to be great markers for insulin resistance.
Awesome. So some good clinical questions here. So how can we demonstrate that our interventions, peptides, hormone therapy, lifestyle protocols, are truly reversing biological age or extending health span in our patients, which gets into just really how do we quantify it for the patient?
Yeah. So the key there that I heard in that question, initially I was listening to that question at the beginning, and I was like, well, how do we quantify? My mind was going right to visceral adiposity, looking at lean mass, looking at ApoB. A lot of these things, when we help with metabolism, when we help with patients' exercise capacity, this is where we see the greatest change when it comes to overall energy levels, when it comes to clarity of mind, when it comes to just being proud of the way that they look and feel. And so it's more of a conversation, and this is kind of like the relationship that you have with your patient. One of the things that we ask, very early on when we're talking to patients is, what are you trying to achieve and why? And the big question is the why. And if you keep on asking that question over and over, well, I shouldn't be overweight. Well, why shouldn't you be overweight? Well, I'm not fitting into my clothes. And well, why does not fitting into your clothes matter? It's like, well, I'm noticing that I'm not as confident at work when I don't. And then you start to get closer and closer to the real why behind why they're trying to do what they're doing. And this is what quality of life is. And this is what Healthspan means to them. And this is what we can help them achieve. And the great thing about this is we can help them achieve this on the route to lowering the things that we're thinking about. We're thinking about visceral adipose tissue, ApoB, and fasting insulin, and muscle mass. And it's the same game that we're both playing, but it means something different to the both of us, because we can do it at the same time.
Multiple paths to the same endpoint.
Yeah.
All right. How can we identify some of the early warning signs of decline before they become clinical. So would that be VO2 max dropping, HRV changes, anything metabolically? I guess it kind of ties into another question here, which is what are some of the sensor data we can look at between the lab tests that might also help us predict if things are going in the right or the wrong direction? So maybe to bubble up the question, Leonard, would be how can we use wearable data as predictors of moving in the right direction or the wrong direction? Because we're not running the labs every day and we're
Mhm.
not doing the DEXA scans every day. So what kind of markers can we use between the tests to get some inferences of progress or decline?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot about body composition, even outside of a DEXA scan, because it seems to be the result or the consequences of the decisions we're making, and even this acceleration in aging, where you might be saying, hey, I'm eating the same amount of food, I'm eating the same types of foods, why am I looking down at my scale and it's a little bit higher? So most scales now will come with body fat percentage and muscle mass, and it's not as accurate, but you can start to see things going in different directions when you look at your body fat percentage. So I think that's one main clue that's showing up. I think I get a lot of information out of my Aura Ring. I get a lot of information
Me
out
too.
of my stress levels, my
Yep,
HRV. Am I
100%.
recovering? Am I recovering well? Am I waking up in the middle of the night a lot? Do I have a lot of stress on my mind because I'm thinking about what I need to do the next day? I get a lot of information from that Aura Ring, and I think that this is something on how we monitor things in between some of these other tests that we do.
Could not agree more. I think HRV, sleep, and maybe throw a CGM in there and just start to really calibrate to those things day to day between the lab test visits and body comp. Maybe those four between the visits would be, I think, a good way to do it. I've got the InBody H30 home scale,
Yeah, me too.
which I use, and then so that helps me with the body comp. I check in once a week. I use the Oura Ring for sleep and HRV, and then I will use either a continuous glucose monitor or just an old school finger stick that can do glucose ketone when I'm looking to optimize. But I think those are some of the best ones we could probably use between the tests to continue to optimize and track. This one's for heads up. So there was a question that came in asking, can we combine traditional labs, lipids, HbA1c, with advanced markers, epigenetic clocks, organic acid, VO2 max, to create a holistic longevity score? And that's actually something we've had a lot of requests for from customers, well, clinics on Heads Up, and they want to build their own algorithms and they want to build their own scores. And that is absolutely something that the Heads Up platform can do. We can help you ingest all of this information, synthesize it, and then we can build any type of custom score that you want. Obviously, we'll need to collaborate with you on the logic behind the score, and we need to iterate on it. But we do a lot of that type of work where clinics already have ideas for their own proprietary score, and we can build it and crunch it and trend it and calculate it across the board for all the patients in the practice. So if that's something you want to do, we can definitely help with that.
That's
Let's
awesome.
see. Yeah, that's a new thing we're doing. We're just getting a lot of requests on that.
That's cool.
Um, let's see. There's a question here that's interesting. It's can we talk a little bit more about the vision for AI and how that is going to have an impact on longevity medicine, specifically to Heads Up? We're now owned by an AI company. So what does that really mean? Lots of different directions we can go there, but for Heads Up specifically, think of it as being able to have your own natural language conversational ability with all of the patient data inside of your system, where you can start to query data using natural language. You can ask it to calculate trends on data. You can you can ask it to create a leaderboard. You can ask it to sort data from highest to lowest. You can ask it what tests am I missing on this patient before I can start to make more inferences. You can start to ask it using different types of prompts to create different treatment plans. So you could ask it to create a metabolic focused treatment plan, and that would get presented to you as the clinician based on everything we know about that individual in Heads Up. And then you'll have a chance to go through that recommendation and then tailor it based on what you know about the individual that the AI system doesn't know. So I think a few things. One is it's going to extract a lot more value from the data for clinicians because it's going to be much easier for them to interact with that data. You'll literally just be able to query the types of reports that you want on the screen. I think it will help to save a lot of time just doing things like preparing treatment plans, for example, or updating a note, or finding any of the gaps in care in their lab tests. I think it can also do more interesting types of correlation analysis. For example, I remember testing it. I put my aura data in there and asked it to correlate my HRV with solar flares, where there's real published data on this correlation out
Mm.
there. So I think it's going to be able to do all of the things to help clinicians analyze a lot more data than they would be able to do just in any moment in time. Because Leonard, think about it. You've got somebody with true diagnostic scans, 10 years of blood work, an aura ring, DEXA scans, InBody scans, microbiome data. Like, how do you look at all of that holistically? It's a lot to process. So that type of data analysis, I think, will get a lot easier and a lot more powerful. So we're hopeful that it will just unlock a lot more capabilities from the data. That's how we're thinking about it at Heads Up. But I'd welcome any of your thoughts on that, Leonard.
No, that's really exciting. We're living in a really exciting time. What comes to mind there for me is with so much data, and something that I've loved about Heads Up is I've been putting my data in there for a long time, and seeing something like running low and thinking, oh, why am I low here? And then looking 10 years ago and being like, well, I've always ran kind of low on that biomarker. But when you're describing what this can do for physicians, I'm thinking about something that we think about a lot in that velocity of change as to when we can identify risk and intervene early. And so with Heads Up having all that data, longitudinal data going back, they can see what someone's baseline is and what is accelerated the velocity of change that's happening, that they might still be within a normal range, but that velocity of change is quick and it means something, so that the provider, it's always going to be about AI and the human and how we can kind of work together. And so the provider can understand that and then take a deeper dive into what's happening there and really tailor treatment and identify things way sooner than they would have before, because AI is in the background analyzing even the velocity of change and comparing it to their norm or their baseline. So that's just one of the things that pops in my mind. So very exciting, really cool
Yeah,
stuff.
just doing the hard math. Like that's not something that's calculated. Like, hey, I've got 7 years of fasting insulin readings. Go calculate the velocity of change for every patient in the system and find me the ones that have the highest velocity of change in the wrong
Hmm.
direction. Like that's just stuff you don't calculate on the fly. It would be way too tedious and cumbersome to go do that for every single person in the practice. It's not a biomarker that shows up on the report from the lab because they're
Yeah,
not looking at it all. And that's something you can do in seconds.
yeah. And then you can analyze it with all the interventions that are being done for those patients, because you can identify where treatment is mismatched, where you have patients that are accelerating in insulin resistance. Um, yeah, it's just we can talk about it for hours probably. There's so many situations where this is going to be kind of game changing. It's great.
Yeah, I think that's the next step for Heads Up, really, is getting the data for the practice AI ready. That's why you want to link up with us. You want to get the InBodies connected, the EHRs. So the more data you put into Heads Up, we get it AI ready. And then the way we'll do it is we'll provide an AI layer on top of the data that is secure and HIPAA compliant so that none of that information ever gets into the public models. So think of it like your own private instance of all of these LLMs to do this type of crunching on the data. So more to follow on that in the coming months.
Really cool.
All right, Len. It's 4:40 on the East Coast. It's happy hour time there. We don't want to keep you any longer.
Yep.
So thank you
Yep.
for joining again. I know we asked a lot of you, Len. We've got a little special gift coming your way. So our little token of appreciation. Thanks for also just being flexible yesterday. I know there were a few instances where the slides cut out and we had to wing it a little bit. So I think the final product turned out great, the one that'll go out, but
Yeah.
there was definitely a couple speed bumps there. So thanks for rolling with us.
Yeah, no problem. It was a lot of fun. This is great, and hopefully we can do it again in the future when we have more information.
Well, I'll be doing a little spiel at your event
Yeah,
in
absolutely. I
what
didn't
if I
know
did
about
it
all
on the
this
AI
AI stuff.
stuff?
Do you have to? Like this is like I'm excited. There's a lot of cool stuff here. I was on the phone with some partner today that's, what I can tell you from talking to a lot of medical providers is that when they all have a similar problem, and that I want to do all these cool things for my patients, but I have 8 tabs open and I don't like I'm sending my patient to go register for 8 different apps. And I was actually telling him that, to link up with you. And yeah, I know you have to talk about at the next event. I think this is because when it comes to COVID, this event is on COVID. A big part of that is understanding the timeline of these patients on long COVID, understanding the timeline of when these symptoms happened and when things change, because understanding which variant they were maybe exposed to, there's ways of personalizing treatments. So, that alone would take care of that. And then, of course, when we have CALM, the clinical application of longevity medicine next year, this is going to be a great topic, because we want to talk more about the integration of AI into medicine, but not directly to the consumer, but for the medical
Exactly.
provider.
Yeah,
And so
that's
this
how we're
is
building
this
it.
is yeah, this is really freaking exciting, man. I'm
Yeah.
excited.
Well, I'll have a little bit for my 5 minutes there, just to kind of tease some of the stuff we can do. And then if you're a practitioner out there and this is something that resonates with you and you want to get started, go ahead and reach out to us and we'll set up a discovery call. We want to learn about your practice, what type of outcomes you're looking for, and then how we can help you track those outcomes, delight your clients, show progress, deliver the wins, get them to their why, and all the other parts of that. That's our mission here at Heads Up. So we'd love to hear from you. Thanks again, Leonard. I'll see you in West Palm. Do you want to mention a bit about the course or the upcoming seminar or anything you want to leave us with?
Yeah, we talked about a lot of fun things. To go into deeper details, we have our course, the Clinical Application of Longevity Medicine Certification course, where we dive deep into peptides. We have our event that's happening here specifically on long COVID, really diving into those treatment plans. And of course, next year in February, the Clinical Application of Longevity Medicine, which is our main event of the year. But you can find all this stuff out at nuBioAge.
You guys rocked it your first year at Com. I can't
I
wait to
know
see
it's
what
going to be
happens here
it's going to
too.
be hard to outdo
You
that one,
set the
but
bar
yeah,
high, man. It was
we
fun.
did, we did. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
going to do it again.
All right. Thanks, brother. Have a great weekend.
All
Thank
right,
you, everybody
thanks.
online. Yep.
Bye.